Good morning. Before we dive into today's sermon, I just want to update you on where we are in our reopening process. As you know, for the longest time now, we've been taking reservations for Sunday morning worship. For months, we were holding one Sunday morning service, allowing up to 50 people into that service. And then a few weeks ago, we went back to 2 Sunday morning services because we were reaching capacity with the one service. 2 services on Sunday morning with 75 reservations, 75 designated seats in each service. And I know that the reservation process is a little bit clunky and cumbersome. You have to think in advance, especially out for low-tech people. No names need be mentioned. It can be a barrier to entrance. And now that we have 2 services going with 75, we're filling about half of the available seats for reservation because, understandably, a number of our folks are still a little bit hesitant about whether to return to in-person worship. And so available seats are ahead of demand by almost a 2-to-1 margin, giving us lots of flexibility there. So at its meeting this past week, the board of directors decided that we can lift the reservation requirement for Sunday morning worship. That doesn't mean we're going to pack out the building, shoulder to shoulder. We'll still keep it to 75 per service, at least for the time being, but at least you won't have that reservation requirement in front of you. So you can just show up on Sunday morning. Everybody's welcome, unless your name is Mike Driscoll, in which case a special papal dispensation will still be required to get into the building. But for everybody else, you can now just show up on Sunday morning. Now, that doesn't mean that we're back to the pre-COVID days. Safety is still paramount. Throughout this COVID pandemic, as best we can tell, not one case of COVID has been transmitted in this church building, and we aim to keep it that way. We want to keep it that way, so masks are still required. We all heard the CDC announcement this past week, but remember, in Marion County, there's still a legally binding requirement to wear masks inside of buildings, and we're going to comply with that law. And when Marion County ultimately lifts that requirement, then our board of directors will get back together and figure out how to respond to that. So masks are still required. We'll still take your temperature as you enter and ask you the COVID screening questions. And we'll still ask that folks sit in a designated numbered seat so as to preserve ample social distancing between friendship and family groups in the sanctuary. The difference is that now on Sunday morning when you show up, instead of us assigning a seat to you, you'll come into the sanctuary and be able to pick whatever numbered seat is available at that time. So hopefully that will make it more convenient and easier while preserving 6-foot distancing. Those who are thinking about maybe coming back, I want you to understand that even when we get up to having 75 in the sanctuary again, that will still just be 25% of our sanctuary capacity. So there's plenty of room for social distancing in the sanctuary. As Pastor Chris mentioned, our children's wing is open for our kids at the 11 o'clock service. And starting the first Sunday in June, our teen life group will resume meeting at the 11 o'clock service. Pastor Chris recorded his family moment before the board decided no further reservations. So teens and kids also don't require reservations as we move forward. To those who are out there participating with us online, many of you, maybe you've been thinking about coming back, but you're hesitant. I just want to encourage you. Give it a shot next week. You can come into the sanctuary, sit down, and if it doesn't feel comfortable, you can slip out. But give it a shot. We'd love to see your smiling face. Or I guess I should say your smiling eyes behind your beautiful mask. And folks who have been coming back after a year of being away have been telling me it feels really comfortable and safe, and it feels so good to be in the same room together worshiping together. You don't realize how much you miss it until you get back. For those who might not yet be vaccinated, I just want to give you a little pastoral exhortation. Please get vaccinated. If you're not concerned about yourself, think about our church family, right? Because studies show that when we're unvaccinated, we are much more likely to transmit the virus to somebody else, even if it's not affecting us. So for our church family, for our fellow citizens, for our nation, for our world, let's all get vaccinated. It's the loving, sacrificial, other-focused Jesus thing to do. So let's make this the safest place it can possibly be so that everybody's comfortable coming back. Enough about that. Let's say a prayer, and then we'll dive into today's sermon. God, open our hearts to your holy word. Guide us as we wrestle with what your word means for us today. We ask in the name of Jesus. Amen. So after today, we'll have just 1 week left in our sermon series on prayer, a sermon series that's been based, as you know, on Father James Martin's best-selling book, Learning to Pray, a guide for everyone. Today, we're going to focus on Father Jim's 17th chapter, which talks about the kinds of things that tend to distract us from prayer. We all sense, I think, that prayer is the absolute foundation for building a close personal relationship with God. We all want to pray. I mean, we're genuine in our desire to pray, but the distractions can be constant. There are what I would call both macro distractions and micro distractions. Micro distractions is when we're trying to focus on prayer, but all of a sudden, all of these scattered thoughts start bombarding our brains and making it difficult for us to keep focused. Macro distractions are when there's some major change in life circumstances that can discombobulate the spiritual rhythm of our life, knocking us off our spiritual rhythm. We're going to talk about both macro and micro distractions today, starting with the micro distractions. You know what it's like, right? You say to yourself in the morning, today I'm going to pray. So you start to pray. God, today I want to tell you what I'm thankful for. I am so thankful for... Wait, did my phone just ding? I wonder who it is. Oh, no. Focus. As I was saying, I want to tell you what I'm most thankful for today is, oh no. I think I forgot to set my TiVo to record my favorite show. Excuse me, God, I'll be right. No, Jeff, focus. Okay. God, what I am most thankful for. Whoa, did my stomach just growl? I wonder if I'll have a salad for lunch or McDonald's French fries. Speaking of thankful, do you know how much I love McDonald's French fries and all of this? Focus in praying can be one of our greatest challenges. If you've been there, I want you to know that you are in good company, but I also want you to know that micro distractions in prayer can be tamed. I've lived a long time now. For some of you, I'm old enough to be your grandpa. And over the course of that time, I've learned a thing or two, and one of the things I've learned is that distractions in prayer can be tamed. It's a matter of technique. Distractions in prayer are a technical problem that can be tamed with the right technique. But this is the stuff nobody ever talks about in church. We go to church and they say, you should pray. What's wrong with you? But never take the time to help us troubleshoot the challenges that we face in prayer on a very practical and operational level. And so today, I want to share with you for free, no subscription required, Grandpa Jeff's 5 amazing tips for taming distractions in prayers. Real practical stuff. Number 1, find a quiet place to pray. Go into a room, close the door, or if you're outside, get away from people. You may say, Jeff, you have no idea how much commotion and noise there is in my house. I'm looking at you, Steph. How much, with little kids around, how much commotion or noise there is in my house. Okay, here's what you do. Tip number 2, put on noise-canceling earphones, or on your phone or your tablet, play white noise. Simply go to YouTube and do a search under celestial white noise. And at the very top of the list, there'll be this beautiful recording of celestial white noise that will play for as long as you want. It's what I do when I'm here in the office and I'm trying to focus on something, and Pastor Vivian is on the phone in the office next to me, and our walls aren't all that thick and well insulated interiorly. So when she's yelling at somebody on the phone, it's a little bit hard for me to concentrate. Have you ever heard Vivian yell? I would give money to. Oh, okay, I'd give money to hear that. But if I'm being distracted, then I'll put on white noise on my computer. If I'm at home and and David is playing the TV a little too loud because he doesn't have his hearing aids in, then I'll put white noise on, and suddenly I'm all alone again in my space. Tip number 3, if you're not using your phone for white noise, then for the love of God, turn it off. Amen. Did you know that you could turn off your phone for 15 minutes and survive? Talk about being a grandpa. I can remember all the way back to the days when phones were fixed on the wall in your house. And when you were away, nobody could reach you, and you couldn't reach anybody, sometimes for hours at a time. Not just that, but I can remember when that phone was hanging on the wall, back when I was a kid, it was still what they called a party line. That means you would share that line with 4 other neighbors, which means if they were on the line, nobody could reach you, and you couldn't call out until they got off the line. And let me tell you something, old Miss Schaefer had some pretty long conversations, because we listened into them. They were some pretty long conversations, and yet somehow we survived. So, turn off your phone so that you minimize those disruptions. Number 4, this may be the most important one of all. When you pray, speak out loud to God. If you're not in a place where you can speak out loud, you can write out your words or type out your words, because you see, the brain hates a vacuum. And so when we're trying to pray silently, often that vacuum gets filled with all kinds of scatological thoughts. And so I have found if I'm trying to pray quietly, that I'm probably 10 times more likely to get distracted. But as soon as I engage my mind in the spoken word, my focus goes up exponentially. Try it. It works. You can tell your family, you can tell your roommate, if you hear me talking in the room, I'm not going crazy, I'm just praying. Go into your quiet space and fill it with the sound of your voice. You talking to God, and you verbalizing back to yourself what you sense God's Spirit saying to you. Finally, 5th practical tip, and Father Jim echoes this as well in his 17th chapter. When you are distracted in prayer, consider talking to God about what's distracting you. If I am so angry with Savannah that I can't think of anything else, no matter how hard I try, maybe I need to talk to God about that. But it's also true of lesser things that may seem trivial. If I'm thinking about my favorite TV show, if I'm thinking about how much I love McDonald's French fries, if you're sitting there with a friend, you'd be talking about how much you love your McDonald's French fries. So talk to God like that. It's kind of like a martial arts move, right? Where you leverage the weight of your opponent and turn it back against them. So when a distraction comes in, that pray the distraction. Suppose you're sitting down for lunch with a good friend, Father Jim says, and suppose at the outset of your lunch conversation you say to your friend, I'm so glad to be here with you, to be in your company, but please understand that if I seem a little bit distracted, there's just something I'm really worried about. Now, what's your friend going to say? Tell me about it. What's going on with you? And then you proceed to have an amazing, cathartic conversation with your friend, and you feel so much better. If your friend cares to know what's on your mind, how much more a God who loves you infinitely. Prayer matters, and therefore technique in prayer matters. I hope you care enough about your relationship with God to experiment with some of these practical ideas. Micro distractions in prayer can be tamed. But that still leaves all those macro distractions. Macro distractions are where something fundamental shifts in your life. Maybe it's a new job, or maybe it's leaving an old job. Maybe it's a new relationship, or maybe it's a breakup in a relationship. Maybe it's birthing or adopting a baby into your household. That changes everything. Maybe it's a loved one who dies. Every time there's a major circumstantial change in our life, there is great potential for disruption of our spiritual rhythm. Another example of a macro distraction is just as we move forward through the seasons of life, our passion for spiritual life may naturally ebb and flow. Maybe there was a time when you were all about talking to God in prayer, but now your life is so complicated and so busy, it's just not a priority anymore. That's part of the natural ebb and flow of the seasons of life and the seasons of relationship. I saw a cartoon the other day. The title on it was The Seasons of Life. Showed two guys laying on a beach sunbathing. One was labeled 1996 and the other one was labeled 2016. This is what it looked like. You notice the difference here? So the one that's labeled 1996 is wearing these psychedelic paisley pattern shorts. The one that's labeled 2016 has solid color bathing trunks on, but he's all tattooed up in that same psychedelic paisley pattern color. The point of the cartoon being everything changes. Nothing stays the same. And as we move through the seasons of life, that means with every adjustment in life, we have to find our new spiritual rhythm. That's what I hear Jesus talking to us about in our scripture passage today. You heard Amy read earlier, Matthew chapter 13, Jesus' famous parable of the different kinds of soil and the seed that falls on them. Jesus uses it to illustrate for us 4 different ways people respond to God in their life. So first, there's the category where the hard pathway, the ground that's packed down along the pathway, seed falls on that, illustrating people who ignore the voice of God in their life. Don't want to hear it. Category 1. Category 2 is the shallow soil, where someone opens themselves to the voice of God and experiences the excitement of a new relationship with God. And it's like you're in this honeymoon period of relationship with God where you just can't get enough, but then eventually you cool off a little bit and may begin to drift. Category 3 is the soil that's infested with thorns. So people who've made a connection to God, all of a sudden there are disappointments and disruptions and distractions in their life. And before long, they're drifting away. But then Jesus says there's a 4th category of people who somehow manage to put down deep roots, stabilize, and spend a lifetime in thriving spiritual life. Now, when we hear that parable, it's normally presented as 4 different kinds of people, 4 different ways of responding to God, which tees up the question, which kind of person am I? And that's a valid way to look at the parable. But it occurs to me there's another important way to look at this parable, because the truth is, probably most of us could say that at one time or another in life, we've segued into and out of each of these different categories in our spiritual life. So this parable is not just about this kind of person, this kind of person, this kind of person. It's also about the natural ebb and flow, the natural seasons of spiritual life that any one of us may experience as we move through life. So there's that time in life when maybe we were ignoring the voice of God, category 1, but then something happened and it opened us up to God, and we were so excited and went into that honeymoon phase of relationship with God where we couldn't get enough. But then category 3 comes along: disappointments, distractions, all kinds of difficulties in life. And our spirit begins to get choked out and we start to drift away. But then category 4, some people somehow manage to break through all of that, put down deep roots, stabilize, and experience lifetime, thriving relationship with God. Raising the question, how? What is it that separates people who ultimately drift away from spiritual life from those who are able to break through, put down deep roots, and thrive in relationship with God over time? How is it that we can get from that honeymoon phase through all of those distractions and disappointments and difficulties in life and break through into that place where our roots are so deep in God, we will thrive in relationship with God for a lifetime? The answer, I believe, is found in a single word. It's a word you've probably never heard before. It's a Hebrew word, Checed. The initial C is silent, so you pronounce it as Chesed. It's a Hebrew word that recurs in the Bible numerous different times. It is probably the single most important word in the Bible for anyone who wants to experience thriving lifetime relationships of any type with spouse, with children, with parents, with friends, and even with God. Chesed is perhaps the most important relationship word in the Bible. So what does it mean? Are you familiar with the biblical story of Ruth and Naomi? You probably know the basic outline of the story. How Ruth was Naomi's daughter-in-law, right? And over time, they developed a close, beautiful relationship. But then life happened. Naomi's husband died an untimely death unexpectedly. Then Ruth's husband, Naomi's son, died an untimely and unexpected death. Talk about shifting circumstances in life. Circumstances had completely disrupted Naomi and Ruth's life. And in that time, in that culture, when it wasn't customary for women to be in the workforce, the only way for widows to survive was typically to go back to their families of origin so that they could be taken in there and taken care of. So the death of Naomi and Ruth's husbands not only meant that they had lost their husbands, it also now meant that they were going to have to separate from each other. They were also going to lose each other. And that was Naomi's wise advice to Ruth. Naomi said, you need to go back home to your family. And me, Naomi, I'm going to go back to the land of Israel where I came from and see if I can find some distant relative still alive back there that will take me in. But you, Ruth, need to go back to your family here. You're young enough. You can probably remarry. But Ruth adamantly refuses and goes on to speak these epic biblical words. Ruth chapter 1, verse 16. Ruth says to Naomi, do not press me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people and your God my God. Where you die, I will die. There I will be buried. May the Lord curse me and worse, if even death parts me from you. And that's what Ruth did. She refused to separate from Naomi. She made the whole dangerous journey back to Israel. It was risky. There was genuine risk here. And when they arrived back in Israel, they were dirt poor. They had to literally scrape and beg to have enough food to eat until finally they found a distant relative of Naomi that was willing to take them in. And they were able to be with each other for the rest of their life. What Ruth did for Naomi is the embodiment of the biblical concept of Chesed. Chesed literally means tenacious love. In the Bible, in modern English translations, when Chesed occurs, it's usually translated as steadfast love. You know what steadfast love means, right? It means I stand fast here and I will not be moved. The Bible uses Chesed to describe not only how human to human should relate, but how God relates to us. For example, in the book of Psalms, Chesed is used more than 127 times to describe how God relates to us. For example, Psalm 36:7, your steadfast love, O Lord, extends to the heavens, your faithfulness to the clouds. God will never give up on you no matter what, in season and out of season. God's love pushes through everything. It's a love so great, Jesus went to the cross for us, and guess what? Now, we are called to share that same love with the people around us. Jesus put it this way, John 15:12, this is my commandment, that you love one another. How? As I have loved you. So the same love that God shows toward us, that push through, never give up love, we are now called to exhibit in the relationships in our life. What does that look like? One of the best blessings of being a pastor is that people will often share with you very intimate stories about pivotal moments in their life journey. And you as a pastor get to learn not only from your own experience, but from all these stories that you hear. I remember a time when I first became a pastor, when I first came here years ago, and there was a couple in our church. They had been together for over 12 years already, which back then was a long, long time. They were considered a model couple in our congregation. I mean, people looked up to them as role models of what a thriving, long-term relationship could and should look like. And when they found our church, they decided they now wanted to exchange their covenants in the presence of God and their church community. So when I sat down to meet with them for premarital counseling, one of the questions I asked was, what's, in your 12 years of relationship together, what's the hardest thing you've faced? There was a long pause. Then one of them said, well, I guess I should answer this. She said, about 4 years into our relationship, it was like the honeymoon was over and things weren't as exciting as before. She said, I thought that meant there was something wrong. So she said, I did something stupid and terrible. I had an affair. I tried not to show it, but I was stunned. The last thing I expected to hear from this model couple with a thriving relationship was that they had encountered something that monumental in their relationship. I turned to the other one and I said, how did it affect you? She looked down at the table. She could barely get the words out. She said, it was so painful. I said, well, how did you get through it? She said, well, when you've invested so much of yourself in somebody, you don't just let it go. She was willing to deal with it and try to make it right. So we decided we'd see if we could get it back to good again. And we did. She smiled. And I thought to myself, I'm in the presence of something very holy. The living embodiment of what Checed looks like. Look, we all know that sometimes relationships of any kind can fail. But Checed means not before we have given it every possible effort, come hell or high water. This is where I stand, and I will not be moved, because all relationships are going to go through seasons and times, and every relationship will experience hardship, not necessarily that kind of hardship, but all different kinds of hardship. And if you want a lifetime relationship of any kind, you gotta push through those things. David and I had our wedding ceremony more than 30 years ago. And over the course of the past 30 years, we've learned a thing or two. Not long ago, in the middle of the night, one night, I woke up and David was sitting up in bed. He seemed agitated about something. I said, "What's the matter?" He said, "I had a terrible nightmare." I said, "Well, tell me about it. What happened?" He said, "Well, in this nightmare, I was at this auction for husbands. And they were auctioning off all kinds of different husbands. Some were going for like $10,000. A few went for as much as $1 million. Intrigued, I said, "Was I in your dream?" "Yes," he said, "you were in there." I said, "How much were husbands like me going for?" He said, "Well, that was the scary part." He said they were tying together husbands like you in a bundle and selling you for $1 a bundle. I'm sure over the course of our 30 years, there have been many times when David has been tempted to think, maybe I should trade him in for a new model. Maybe I should find one of those husband auctions and see if I can get a better deal. But he doesn't do that. Through hard times, we push through. Because more than 30 years ago, like Ruth and Naomi, we exchanged a vow that said, "Where you go, I will go. Your people will be my people. What's yours will be mine, and mine will be yours. Your God will be my God. Where you're buried, there I will be buried. May not even death itself ever separate us again." Chesed, love. I've come to believe through personal experience and through the stories that I've heard and the relationships that I've observed, I've come to believe that perhaps the single most important principle for any relationship of any kind, not just spousal, but for parents and kids, for brothers and sisters, for friends, all kinds of relationships, the most important principle is when times are hard, instead of asking, "Can we get through this?" instead we ask, "How will we get through this?" You see the difference, right? Can we get through this leaves open the possibility that we might not get through this. And we all know we might not get through this. But if you start at that place, the chances that you won't get through it go up exponentially. If you begin with the attitude, failure is not an option, so how are we going to get through this? The chances of pushing through it, getting through it, go up exponentially. And then you break out on the other side in a level of depth and relationship that is so beautiful, so much more beautiful, that it was worth every effort. The same is true in our relationship with God. It's what Jesus meant when he said in Matthew 22:37, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind." Just as God relates to us with Chesed love, so too we are called to relate back to God with that same kind of deep, committed love. In his chapter 17, Father Jim puts it this way: like any other part of life, spiritual life is filled with natural ups and downs. Often, this surprises newcomers to prayer. It's similar to the situation of a newly married couple who discover that wedded life is sometimes a challenge. An older couple might nod knowingly and say, "Of course, it goes with the territory." Which brings us full circle. Just as human relationships experience their natural ups and downs, so too our relationship with God will experience its ups and downs. The only way you and I can have a thriving lifetime relationship with God is if we are willing to push through. So that means even when I'm angry with God, I still talk to God. That means even when my passion for God may seem lower than it used to be, I still talk to God. That means that even when I'm busy, I push to find time to talk to God. That means even when I'm distracted, I don't let the distraction keep me from talking to God. Instead, I talk to God about the distraction. Because loving someone is less about a feeling and more about a decision. Loving someone is a decision that we make. It's a decision that says, this is who I am. I'm your husband. I'm your son. I'm your brother. I'm your friend. And so that's what I'm going to be, and that's what I'm going to do. When I feel like it, and when I don't feel like it. Because that's who I am. It's the same with God. Living in relationship with God is about a decision. I have decided to follow Jesus. So that means it's fundamental to who I am as a person, and it's not up for negotiation. It's something that has already been decided. It's who I am. I'm a person of faith when I feel like it and when I don't. I come to church when I feel like it and when I don't, because it's who I am. I serve God when I feel like it and when I don't, because it's who I am. I pray to God when I feel like it and when I don't, because that's who I am. A committed child of God. Let me close with this, and sorry I've gone on too long today, but this is important stuff for all of our life relationships. But let me close with this. Roger Zerby suffered from early onset Alzheimer's. His wife Becky tells about a time when Roger had a particularly difficult, forgetful day, and she discovered a note that he had left for her in his journal. Becky says, I picked up his journal laying open on my pillow, and I read these words he had written. "Honey, today fear is taking over. I know the day is coming when all my memories of this life we share will be gone. You and the boys will be gone from me. I'll lose you even as I'm surrounded by you and your love. I don't want to leave you. I want to grow old in the warmth of our memories. Forgive me for leaving so slowly and painfully." Becky, blinking back tears, says, "I took up my pen and I wrote this response. My sweet husband, what will happen when we get to the point that you no longer know me? I will continue to go on loving you and caring for you. Not because you know me or remember our life together, but because I remember you. I'll remember the man who proposed to me and told me he loved me. The look on his face when his children were born. The father he was. And the way he loved our extended family. I'll recall his love for writing, hiking, and reading. His tears at sentimental movies, the unexpected witty remarks, and how he held my hand while we prayed. I will cherish the pleasure, obligation, commitment, and opportunity to care for you, because I will remember you." You don't build something that beautiful overnight. It is the product of a lifetime of devotion and endurance. It is remaining committed through all the ups and downs. It's about investing ourselves and going through the motions, in the best sense of that term, when we feel like it and when we don't. And little by little, almost imperceptibly, something incredibly beautiful emerges. Imagine you plant a tree in your front yard. And at the first signs of any problems with the tree, you chop it down and replant another tree. And at the first signs of any problem, you chop it down again and again and again. When you're old, your tree's going to be about this tall. But if you push through, when you're old, the tree will be a mighty oak. What do we want our relationship with God to look like? Hesed love, profound commitment. I will not be moved. In season, out of season, this is who I am. When I was a kid in youth group, we learned this chorus. I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back. No turning back. May not even death itself ever separate me from you. Amen.